you talked about the people that came for the noxious folks first. I mean, I think we're talking about probably Alex Jones was one of the first big ones. Um, when that happened, I was one of the few people in media who popped up and said, "Hey, this is not necessarily a good thing. Like, I think you have to look at what this means for the rest of the business. Today, it's going to be Alex Jones, and if this mechanism proves successful, just by its nature, it's going to start looking for the next thing. It's going to decide Ben Shapiro is next, and then it's going to start looking around. Then there's going to be a process where groups are going to start demanding that we take the extreme version on the other side off to compensate for this person, and it's going to narrow the field progressively." That started to happen. And then additionally, right after, if you remember with the Alex Jones thing, some of the platforms started to, this was at the height of the Russia mania, they started to zap pages that they were calling coordinated inauthentic content. And some of them were just regular old, sort of alternative media sites who happened to be deemed inauthentic by Facebook and some other of these big platforms. And I tried to get people in the business interested in this problem, which was that the press traditionally got its independence from having its own distribution, at least print journalism did, right? So the newspaper in a locality built its power up over decades by having its own trucks, by having its own distribution routes, its own sales points, its own paper kids even. They were the only people in town, in the area, who were able to reach all those millions of people. And so that's how they had their power. You couldn't take it from them. But in the internet age, that vanishes overnight. Distribution is now wholly in the hands of a couple of companies, basically. The overwhelming majority of people in this country get their news from Google or Facebook or Twitter. And so what happens if these companies start making censorious decisions, which is what they were doing? And I was amazed really at the lack of interest in this topic. The standard position of a journalist in the 70s, 80s, and 90s was to be hypersensitive to any possibility of censorship or control over us as an institution. And that spirit has completely vanished from the press. Like people don't even, in fact, they're actively asking to be controlled more, if you even see any op-eds about this subject at all. And so we're in a situation now where people are being removed or deranked or shadow banned or whatever it is constantly. There's no transparency about it. It's effectively a media regulator that is unelected and doesn't answer to the public at all. And it's a very serious problem, because you're right. For all of Joe Rogan's success, at any minute, somebody could say, "Yeah, enough of that," and he'd be reduced to, I don't know what, sending CDs through the mail to people. I mean, that could happen.
Right, and we haven't seen very much of some other layers that actually will come into play here. So first, let me just say, one of the things that is most disturbing and that I don't hear talked about enough is that not only is there this desire to eliminate certain perspectives so that they just simply can't be voiced where anybody can hear them, but it's also rather arbitrary, right? I can tweet that men are not women. I won't get tossed off Twitter. I think the only reason I won't get tossed off Twitter is that I can pull the biologist card, and certain people would riot in the aftermath of me being tossed off for that. But Megan Murphy's gone for saying that. And so I guess the question is, what exactly is this rule that some people can say it and some people can't? Like, what universe do you think that's going to result in? So there's the arbitrariness, which results in, the inevitable outcome here, which is just there's going to be favoritism. This is going to be pure myth making. We're going to decide certain perspectives are okay. Certain people can voice other things. This is going to create advantages. It's every value that we hold dear evaporated all at once. But as far as the layers go, yes, there's Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Reddit and all of these properties. But then there's also the layers below them, right? There's MasterCard. And we have seen this in the past. There are certain instances, actually, before the current cancel culture era, in which we have seen the MasterCard uh, uh, piece pulled out. So I remember early in WikiLeaks, before they had been successfully portrayed as a Republican / Russian asset. In the early days of WikiLeaks, there was a point at which WikiLeaks, to many of us, looked like a very positive force that was doing something very important. It was bringing transparency to these really despicable processes, and it became impossible to donate to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
I did donate to them at one point, and then there was some point at which it became too complicated to do. And so how much of a win was that against WikiLeaks, that suddenly the fact that MasterCard couldn't be, or whatever it was, I
Really
think it was all the
interesting.
credit card thing. There's a failsafe underneath the platform layer, which can be pulled out from under everything. And then below that, there's another one. And I have a feeling in the end, we're going to discover that net neutrality was about something we didn't really understand. That
Mm-hmm.
in the end, the ability of ISPs to take certain people out of circulation will be invoked if nothing else works to silence them.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. All very possible.
Yep.
And we haven't gotten there yet. It probably hasn't been necessary. But I think the embarrassing thing is it hasn't been necessary because we just haven't seen anything like a wide scale rebellion on the part of the people you would expect it to come from. I mean, the people in Maoist China or Soviet Russia who worked in the press, they had an excuse for not raising a ruckus about certain things. The thing that's always bothered me about journalists in the United States is you don't even really need to offer them anything to make them conform. Uh, there's no particularly even any special benefits that you get from doing so. And it's just a very timid, uninquisitive group of people, and they're uniquely ill-suited, I think, to the mission of trying to oppose this thing. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I hadn't thought about those other layers, but those will probably come into play as well. You hear a lot from journalists who are saying, "You cannot believe what's going on in our shop right now," right? Or um, they're meeting out after work in bars. Sometimes people are only willing to talk about what's going on at work if they work with their spouses, right? So this is again recalls the kind of the Soviet cliche of the husband and wife who spoke under the covers at night, about what was going on at work. That stuff's going on in this business now, and yeah, I mean that the problem is that people keep thinking that it's not going to come for them, that if they just go along, that eventually like they'll get to keep their job, and you know it's not going to be a problem, but it eventually it does. It sniffs you out, and people are mistaken if they think they're not going to end up having to collide with it at some point or another.